in Stone by Linda Newbery is technically a children's book, but considering this bright red sticker on the front saying 13 plus, it's fair to say it's more of a teen book. Set mostly in 1898, it follows a young artist, Samuel Godwin, who is employed as an art tutor by Ernest Farrow. His tutees are Farrow's two daughters, the demure and delicate Juliana and beautiful, wild, passionate Marianne. They live in a beautiful manor in Sussex called Four Winds, named for the carvings of the four winds flanking the outer walls. But one is missing. The west wind has never been completed, and at night Marianne goes out in search of him, for Four Winds will never be at peace whilst he is free. Samuel discovers that beneath a beautiful exterior, something is wrong at Four Winds. He and the governess, Charlotte Agnew, begin to dig into the Farrow family's sordid past and discover their horrifying and dangerous secret. I would say about 80% of this book is great. There is a wonderful sense of atmosphere and foreboding. The setting in this strange manor house caught between the contemporary Art Nouveau style and the strange classical pagan friezes representing that almost folkloric name Four Winds. I love the three female leads, Juliana, Marianne and Charlotte, also different from each other and yet so affectionate and sisterly. It was quite a nice dynamic. And this worked really well as a sort of child-friendly gothic read. It's not too over the top with themes of madness and isolation and the unrestful dead, for the most part. But it's enough that adults like me can still enjoy it, for most of the novel anyway. The last 20%, we'll get to that. I've seen some people complain about the writing style. It is, I suppose, a little stuffy and wordy, but I actually quite enjoyed it, especially as one of the narrators is this Ponzi art student, so the way he views the world in colour and form makes sense and definitely emulates that slightly ostentatious style of late 19th century. But it is still very accessible and it's still not a long book. I would just say it's a book that requires one's full attention when reading. I liked the idea of having the two narrators in Samuel Godwin, the Ponzi artist, and Charlotte Agnew, the smart and sombre governess, as it did give the opportunity to reveal information to the reader in a more organic way, and did allow a sense of the dramatic irony at times. It wasn't done perfectly, but I appreciated it nonetheless, and I liked the inclusion of other literature, letters and whatnot written to the characters, almost giving the book a sort of sense of being like a journal with various items tucked between pages. There were a few minor issues. I didn't feel like the two narrators were separate enough. Samuel Godwin and Charlotte Agnew had very similar voices, so I frequently forgot whose perspective I was meant to be reading from. It doesn't help that the chapters begin with their names sort of written in very small font at the very top of the page where you don't necessarily see it. This only really irks me because it's written from the first person perspective, which does allow the author to make those differences a lot more obvious than in third person. I was also hoping for a little bit more discrepancy between the characters' accounts to give more of a mysterious feel, allow some unreliable narration, but there wasn't really very much. I only recall one instance of their accounts differing, but it was a rather small conversational thing that wasn't actually important. So it felt like a missed opportunity there. It is also a little jarring as the story is essentially a flashback. The prologue opens in 1920 with Samuel at a gallery reflecting on a painting he'd done of Marianne at Four Winds. So until Charlotte's first chapter, it does feel like the story is just Samuel's flashback. So perhaps if Charlotte's entries were written as diary entries, it might have flowed a little smoother. I thought the book did maybe go a bit over the top in some specific ways. For the most part it didn't, but there were these moments where Samuel was thinking about Marianne and became quite flustered, and I felt sort of dirty reading it, even though nothing was explicit, but I'm fairly sure it was trying to imply certain solo activities were occurring. And I just found it a bit distasteful because Samuel is 21 and Marianne is 16, which is too much of a gap at that age, I think. So I found it a bit disturbing. And these are meant to be like our heroic characters, not disturbing characters. So I just found it kind of squicky. The main issue I had with this book, however, is the ending. Obviously, you know, here be spoilers. So the story is told, as I said, as a sort of sandwich. It's not a true frame narrative because the story isn't being told as a story, but instead is essentially a long flashback. Not a true flashback, it doesn't remain wholly in Samuel's mind or memory, but it is top and tailed with events from 1920, opening at a gallery exhibition of Samuel's work and ending with him leaving the gallery to show us what happened to everyone else. In the opening, there is a bit of hoo-ha about this painting called The Wild Girl, which is well liked, but Samuel refuses to sell it. He reflects on it quite sadly and says he feels pain when he looks at it, very much giving the impression that the girl in the painting met some unfortunate end and he hasn't really gotten over it yet, or that she represents some traumatic events. This builds an anticipation in the reader. We go into the flashback and quickly identify the wild girl as Marianne and wonder what's going to happen to her. Except nothing does. There is so much build-up to this horrific climax. Gothic touches, the mentions of this lake, the foreshadowing that someone might meet their end there, Marianne's nightly wanderings, her disturbing drawings, her obsession with the missing west wind, her almost ethereal qualities, almost beyond human, and the way Samuel talked about her portrait, all pointed towards tragedy for her. There was even a creepy psychic lady who saw danger before her, and then nothing happened. And look, something does not have to be surprising in order to be tragic. Tragedy can be inevitable, so to not kill it off doesn't really work as a twist just because it goes against expectation. It's actually detrimental to the book because all that build-up feels cheap and empty and lazy. There's no payoff. We discover the dark secret, which is that the dad, driven to extremes by his failure to produce a son by his wife, turns his efforts to gain a male heir through his eldest daughter. And yes, like that. The wife was driven to suicide, Juliana gave birth to her son-cum-brother, and everything was covered up until Charlotte and Samuel, separately, which was an odd decision, reveal it, leading to a climax wherein Juliana tries to drown herself in the lake. Everyone jumps in after her, and we're thinking, is this it? Is this where Marianne dies? No, the dad drowns, Charlotte pushes him back into the water with an oar and reveals that he's also her dad? And everyone else is fine, but Marianne discovers the missing west wind is beneath the water. Is this how she dies? Does she go looking for it, driven by her strange, dare I say, supernatural obsession? No, Samuel gets it and obviously is fine. The ending drags out for a while, and the father's funeral and all that. They sort of sod off to live in a commune, and then we return to 1920 and everyone's alive. Samuel is married to Charlotte and still has the hots for Marianne, who never settled down. Juliana vows to never marry, and they're all friends and see each other at Christmas, and all is well. The end. It's so weird. It's like the author had planned for this dramatic Wuthering Heights-esque finale with death and tragedy, and then her agent just rang up and said, nah, give everyone a happy ending. And after tacking on this nonsense, didn't have time to amend everything else to suit it. It was just bizarre. All in all, I'm glad I read it because I did genuinely enjoy most of it, but the ending was so disappointing. It's like most of it had a good amount of bite, but the ending was so anticlimactic it didn't deserve the happily ever after, and I can't imagine anyone not being a bit disappointed. So, would I recommend it? I don't know. I guess if you like that historical era and want to get into gothic reads or sinister stories, then it might be worth checking out. But it's a bit too safe for veterans of that genre. And that's all I have to say. Until next time, goodbye.